Welcome to the archives, Triant, where every human story begins again. The galactic enclave, a gathering of 1,000 systems, fell silent. This wasn't the silence of reverence. It was the silence of abject universe-shaking shock. Matriarch Vex, her voice, the arbiter of ages, had been speaking of the coming darkness, a threat no empire could face alone. Her words, carried by translators to every delegation, painted a grim picture of a future teetering on the edge of annihilation. Then she just stopped mid-sentence, mid-thought. Her ancient withered hand, a thing of bone and starlight, rose slowly from the arm of her throne. A single trembling finger, thin as a dying branch, extended. It pointed. It bypassed the armored legions of the Cathar, whose carapace armor shimmered with repressed violence. It swept past the psionic lords of Cygnus X1, who floated in their globes of shimmering mental energy. It ignored the crystalline delegates of the Geode Collective, who vibrated with nervous energy. Her finger came to rest, aimed directly at a lone figure standing near the periphery, almost an afterthought in this grand hall of powers. A single soft-skinned bipedal creature in a simple dark blue uniform, the human emissary. And then she said nothing. Seconds stretched into minutes. The silence wasn't empty. It was a physical weight pressing down on everyone. It was a tangible thing, a force that bent light and warped perception. It was a pronouncement more powerful than any declaration of war, more definitive than any treaty. It was a question, an accusation, and a verdict all at once delivered without a single word. That silence shattered empires. It reignited feuds that had slumbered for millennia and forged alliances that defied all logic. What followed would tear the galaxy apart. And at the center of it all was that forgotten human who now had to uncover why he'd been chosen before. There was nothing left to save. My name is Lyran. I'm a junior archivist of the Xyloian Chroniclers. My sacred duty is to observe, record, and understand. But in that moment, I understood nothing. My species prizes clarity above all else. We communicate with precise, unambiguous language because it is through clarity that truth is found. The matriarch's gesture was the antithesis of everything we are. It was an act of supreme galactic-level ambiguity, and its effect was instantaneous, catastrophic. The first to break were the Cathar. Their leader, a hulking brute named General Korg, slammed his gauntleted fist on his delegation's console. The sound cracked through the hall like a fracture in reality itself. "A judgment," he roared, his voice a guttural explosion of gravel and rage. "The matriarch condemns the weakling. She shows us who is unworthy. The human is a liability." His legions stirred, their weapons humming with a newfound righteous energy. They saw the silence as a verdict of guilt, a confirmation of their own superiority. From the other side of the chamber, a wave of pure, unadulterated panic washed over us. It was a psychic scream that needed no translator. The psionic lords of Cygnus X1, their minds usually as calm as the void, were in disarray. A target. Their collective consciousness wailed into our minds. She has marked the human as the source of the threat. The darkness originates with them. They must be purged. To them, the pointing was a clear accusation. The silence was the damning evidence. My own delegation leader, Elder Zoran, turned to me, his multi-icketed eyes blinking rapidly. "Record this, Lyran. Record everything. The galaxy has just gone mad. And the human emissary Kalen Thorn. In the middle of this exploding chaos, as factions began to form and warships in a dozen systems powered their weapons, he just stood there. He didn't flinch. He didn't cry out. The hall's biomonitors showed his heart rate had elevated, but only slightly. He just stood, his gaze fixed on the matriarch, his expression a mask of calm concentration. It was the most unnatural reaction in the entire room. My analytical mind, trained to find patterns, couldn't process it. I've studied over 300 sentient species, I know the physiological responses to being singled out. A surge in adrenaline, the release of fear pheromones, the involuntary tensing of muscles. For social species, being pointed at by an alpha triggers an immediate submissive response. For prey species, it triggers blind panic. Being singled out in such a profound way by such a monumental figure should have caused extreme psychological distress. My research on human psychology confirmed this, pointing as a gesture of authority that triggers anxiety and vulnerability. The silence should have amplified that into near paralysis. Yet Thorne showed none of it. He was an island of stillness in a sea of galactic hysteria. It was as if he wasn't the subject of the event, but an observer, just like me. And that deviation from expected behavior was to my logical mind more terrifying than the Cathar's war cries. Conclave security forces, a neutral body of androids, moved in. They formed a protective circle around the human, not to defend him, but to contain him. He was no longer an emissary. He was a galactic anomaly, a piece of evidence, a symbol that everyone wanted to either claim or destroy. As they escorted him from the hall, 100 different species recoiled. They looked at him with fear, with hatred, with awe, and with naked greed. He was now the most important person in the galaxy, and quite possibly the most endangered. Matriarch Vex hadn't moved. She remained on her throne, finger extended, eyes closed. Her body is still a stone. The silence from her was absolute, but the noise from the galaxy was deafening. Trade routes were severed. Diplomatic channels flooded with accusations. Fleets mobilized, using the matriarch's judgment as the ultimate pretext. The Cathar claimed she had sanctioned a culling of the weaker races, starting with humanity. The Signant Science preached a crusade against the human corruption. And then there were the quiet players, the shadowy consortiums who saw Thorne not as a target, but as a key to what no one knew. But they would tear him apart to find out. As an archivist, my duty is to the truth. And the truth wasn't in the roaring of generals or the screaming of psychics. The truth was with the human. Why did he react that way? Why him? What did the matriarch, a being who hadn't intervened in galactic affairs for 5,000 years, see in this one unremarkable representative? My duty was clear. I had to get to him. I had to understand the silence. Emissary. Thorne was taken to a secure holding cell deep within the Conclave's neutral spire. They called it protective custody, but we all knew it was a prison. He was a singularity, and the first instinct is always to isolate a singularity until it can be understood. I use my status as a chronicler, calling in favors and citing ancient accords that grant my order access to significant historical events to gain an audience. It took 2 full rotations, during which time 2 star systems declared open war. But eventually the android guards let me in. I found him not pacing or ranting, but sitting on the simple cut, seemingly meditating. When I entered, he opened his eyes. They were clear. There was no fear in them, only a deep, weary focus. Archivist Lyran, he said, his voice even. I assume the galaxy is still standing. His calmness was disorienting. Barely, Emissary Thorne, I replied, my own voice tight with the stress he seemed to lack. The Cathar are moving on the Perseus arm. The signs have created a psychic blockade around your home system, Sol. Everyone believes you're either a messiah or a curse. They're choosing sides. And you? He asked, a simple question that carried immense weight. What do you believe? I'm an archivist, I stated, falling back on my function. I believe in data, and the data is incomplete. Your reaction in the conclave? It wasn't logical. It defied every known psychological model. I'm here to understand that deviation. Thorne gave a slight wry smile, a fleeting human expression. You think my calmness is the key. It's the primary anomaly, I confirmed. The matriarch points a gesture designed to isolate and create vulnerability. She adds silence. a void of intent that forces everyone to project their own biases onto it. A perfect psychological weapon. It should have broken you. Why didn't it? He was quiet for a moment. When I was a boy, he began, his voice taking on a distant quality. My grandfather taught me a game. He'd tell me not to think about a white bear. He'd say, whatever you do, for the next 5 minutes, do not imagine a white bear with blue eyes. Of course, that's all I could think about. The instruction itself created the thought. I failed to see the relevance, a paradoxical cognitive loop, a common exercise. Exactly, Thorne said, his eyes lighting up. But then he taught me the solution. You don't fight the thought. You don't try to suppress it. Because you can't. The mind doesn't work that way. Instead, you fill your mind with something else. Something louder, something more chaotic. He taught me to sing a ridiculous song in my head, to picture a purple elephant juggling bananas, to recite a nonsensical poem. You don't defeat the order by imposing a new one. You defeat it with chaos, with noise. My mind struggled to keep up. He was talking about childhood games while empires burned. Emissary, I don't understand. When the matriarch pointed, Thorne explained, leaning forward, and that weight of silence fell. I felt it, the pressure to mean something. The galaxy's expectation wanting to pour into me to define me. The Cathar wanted a coward. The Signans wanted a villain. I felt their projections, their fear, their hate. It was the white bear all over again. If I tried to fight it, to say I'm not what you think, I would have been consumed. So I did what my grandfather taught me. I filled my head with noise. Noise? I asked, completely baffled. Nursery rhymes, old sea shanties, the plot of a stupidly complex historical drama. The chemical formula for baking soda. A list of every dog I ever owned. I filled every corner of my consciousness with meaningless, contradictory, illogical human junk. There was no room left for their fear, no room for their expectations. There was only my internal chaos. I just stood there stunned. His defense against a galaxy-shattering psychic event was gibberish. It was the most illogical, inefficient, and utterly brilliant strategy I had ever encountered. My Xyloian mind, which would have tried to logically deconstruct the threat and been torn apart, could never have conceived of it. Her silence wasn't the attack, Thorne continued, his voice dropping. It was a diagnostic and a warning. She was testing the conclave, and everyone failed. They all filled the silence with their own worst impulses. Paranoia, ambition, fear. They proved her point. What point? I pressed. My role as archivist now forgotten. That's what we need to find out, he said. He stood, and for the first time I saw him not as a specimen, but as a leader. You have access to archives, Lyran, deeper than anyone. I need to know about her species, the Cynthians. Has anything like this ever happened before? A pointing? A silence? What were the circumstances? My purpose returned, sharpened by his. He had given me a new variable, cognitive chaos, as a defense. With it, I could re-examine history. I left his cell with a mission. While he sat in his prison, defending himself with mental nonsense, I would dive into the oldest, most restricted archives in the galaxy. I spent the next cycle in the deep archives, a place of cold light and humming data streams. I cross-referenced every record of the Cynthians with galactic-level threats. Most of it was classified beyond my clearance, but I tried Thorne's illogical strategy. I didn't search for Cynthian intervention. I searched for things like unexplained mass hysteria, spontaneous conflict resolution, and non-linguistic communication. And then I found it. A tiny corrupted data fragment from over 9